Hello, my name is Wayne Norbeck, co-founder of DXA Studio with
Jordan Roga.
And we're very excited to be here for Open House New York today to present 215 to 225 West 28th Street, which is a new development that we're working on that is nearing the completion of construction in about 4 months' time. And so we'd like to walk you through, share our screen here. All right. So just to help orient you to the site of the project, our project is located right here on 28th Street between 7th and 8th Avenue. It's a really interesting block that's undergoing a lot of different types of transformation. And it's in an area of the city with a lot of different things going on. There's Penn Station to the north, there's the Flower District to the east, FIT is located just south of the site. And then, of course, there's all the new development that's happening with Hudson Yards and the High Line over to the west. And it's just really interesting to see this neighborhood take on a complete transformation in the last few years. Our block in particular is really going to be completely different in about the span of the next year or two. Our site is located in the sort of left center. And then there's all these three other new developments that are occurring on the block. And so this entire block is really changing in terms of its scale and texture for the city, and walk you through how our particular project is being developed here. So just to give you some of the basics, we have, there's really two buildings on this development site, and that has to do with the zoning district. The zoning district is an M16D, and it's a very unique manufacturing zoning district in New York City that actually allows you to do residential construction. Most manufacturing districts do not allow that. So this is kind of a spot case where we can do residential. And the project consists of a condo building, which is on the right-hand side of the image, which is the lighter building, and then a rental building on the left. And the total square footage of the project is around 300,000 square feet. There's 200 units of residential, and there's a portion of those residential units located in the rental tower on the left that are actually affordable units that allowed us to build a little bit taller and to do some additional floor area, which is a great benefit for the project. When we first started, the site was actually smaller. It was about half the size. And there were a lot of really interesting constraints that were occurring, namely that there were some holdout buildings, adjacent sites that existed. So as you can see in the studies on the left-hand side of this page, there was actually a building that we were cantilevering over at the very beginning of the project. And then in order to maximize the floor area, we were taking advantage of a special provision in New York City zoning code, which is called a dormer rule, which allows you to build a certain percentage of space out into what otherwise would be a setback. So we studied that in terms of a stepped dormer, as you can see in the two left-hand images. And then we were also studying, like, could we do it so that it's much more integrated with the facade with a kind of continuous diagonal streak? Or do we stop it at the middle of the building? And this became a lot of study in how this would affect the residential units, how it would affect kind of repetition as we move up through the building, and so forth. So this is where we started off in a number of different studies like this. And then one day, as we were discussing the complexities of building a deep foundation on the western side of the site, the owner said, don't worry about that. And then 2 days later, we had a meeting where they explained that they had purchased these sites to the west, and we essentially doubled the size of the project. So at that point, they decided that in addition to a condo building on the right, that we would also do the rental building. But there were a lot of dynamics at play, especially with those existing holdout buildings and how we would cantilever over or distribute the area between the condo building and the rental building in different configurations. And this became a series of studies that we did over several months to kind of maximize the project for the owner. And then ultimately what we did is we just kind of arrived back at a more simple solution, which was simply equally dividing the buildings, and also deals were worked out with those tenant holdouts. So we were able to do full-on buildings with complete facades on either side, which turned out to work really well. And then with this kind of sky exposure plane, which is a zoning requirement that allows more light into the center of the street, we get a series of setbacks, so we really get kind of a tripartite division to the building, base, middle, and top. And Jordan will go into more detail about how the facade kind of reacted to that condition. And on the lower left, you can see just a basic floor plan of how the building is configured with the lots through, but the left-hand lot kind of indentation in the backyard, which affected the massing in the rear of the building.
So right off the bat with the facade, the project, as Wayne mentioned, grew from about 100 linear feet of frontage to 200, with a height just over 200. So we had a kind of a large square facade surface that we were dealing with. And we were concerned about the scale of the building from the beginning in those proportions. The square is kind of inherently static. And we wanted to kind of balance things and make sure that the scale wasn't overwhelming. Because like with most development projects in the city, we're charged with getting every bit of floor area ratio, the FAR, possible. So we're maximizing the form in a lot of ways is derivative of the zoning requirements that Wayne spoke of. So right off the bat, we were thinking about how do you scale this down? How do you kind of break up the rigidity of the building facade across that 200 linear feet? And so we thought about asymmetrical elements, as you see in the sketch on the left there. But as we started to explore what building materials we were going to use and what building technology or construction technology, we really focused in on precast mega panel construction. That is essentially building about 24 to 25 feet of width, a full story at a time, with the windows embedded and constructed and waterproofed and ready to go, and delivered to the site that way so they could be hoisted up and put in place. And so using that technology really dictated a more simpler geometry and more repetitive geometry with kind of a donut construction, meaning kind of circular around the punched openings. And so that then we began to focus on kind of a simpler geometry and looked to other design devices by which to kind of break down the scale to a certain degree. So we have the rigidity of this grid, but then there's a lot of depth to the faceting that we settled on. And then we also looked at contrast, essentially taking the condo and rental buildings and expressing them as two independent buildings and using contrasting colors or materials to them. And so quickly we settled on using the same material, but kind of a different nature, which we'll get into. And as Wayne mentioned, there were some holders on of properties around this building. And so those renderings you see in the upper portion of the screen are kind of a terrifying building proposition that we were exploring for a little while. And then fortunately, we made it to the image on the right, which is kind of a perfect balance between rental and condo, and contrasting materials there. At the bottom of the screen, you see three different grades of fenestration. So starting all the way on the left, the whole base of the building, as we mentioned, a tripartite arrangement, had the smallest windows, which were still pretty massive, like 40 square foot each window, at about 4.5 feet by 9 feet tall. And then that grows for each section until you get the kind of largest windows up at the top in the penthouses. And then these were kind of a series of material studies that we did, really leaning on the aggregate of the concrete for both a kind of a textural and color of the panel. So we have this contrasting kind of the darker charcoal gray, and then the kind of more ivory off-white, which is really about these white marble chip aggregate that's inside. So those colors and the contrast really come from the nature of the material, which we are treating like a terrazzo, casting this in concrete and then basically peeling away the cementitious outer coating to reveal the aggregate. And so this is where we landed with all of those tests and mock-ups of the different cast concrete system. And we worked with BPDL up in Canada, and we basically tried to dial it back to the fewest number and systematize the fewest number of panels necessary to get this kind of graded aperture of building as you work your way up the building. So these are the primary panel types, and then there's a few different ones for the cap of the building and the sides of the building. So we systematized it, and we were able to, using the precast concrete, get a lot of depth. And that's not something you always are able to achieve in a facade. And why that was important to us is this site is extraordinary in that we're located right across from FIT, and FIT has, I think, about 6-story buildings. And we have, a unobstructed view of the sky to the south for the top 15 stories of the building. So the relationship to kind of the sun passing by this facade over the course of the day was really important to us. And this faceted facade really brings the facade to life over the course of the day, changing dramatically from minute to minute as the sun illuminates portions of the panel and casts others into shadow. So we wanted to kind of accentuate that feature by utilizing an element that you see in a lot of terrazzo construction, and that is when it's poured, oftentimes there's kind of a metal separating element, and so we wanted to cast kind of this metallic or bronze piece into the terracotta. So we learned through trial and error that the metal really needed to be something like aluminum to not have a negative chemical reaction with the concrete. And so this is why you do mock-ups, because this looked terrible. we quickly abandoned this idea of an additive piece or a piece that's cast in concrete, and replaced it with this approach where we're able to actually cast a reveal where the facets meet one another, and then use automotive paint inside that channel. And that becomes a reflective surface, so that as the sun's moving across the facade and illuminating different facets, you're getting highlights in some of these channels. And so it's like another layer of kind of life and vitality to the facade. And we did that for the condo building. And so just quickly, a few shots of this incredible operation at BPDL, where they have all of these forms in a row. As one is being poured, the next one has a group putting in the mesh and rebar necessary, and the next one down the line is getting ready for that crew. And so they've systematized and have just really efficiently been able to produce entire facades of buildings in a matter of a few days. So it's quite an impressive operation. And this is after a few days of them making the facade elements for both the condo and the rental building, and storing that inventory out in their yard.
So here's some shots now going to the actual site where we're beginning to put these panels up. And the images that you're seeing here are actually from the rental side and some piers that exist in the lower portion of the building. So the way that these work is there's a tower crane on site. They're delivered in the trucks. They're picked up off the trucks, and then they're lifted into place, and they're attached to the facade with these kind of metal angle clips. And there's slotted connections, and there's also steel shims that are used to get the panels exactly in the right place. This is actually a shot from the 19th floor. As you can see that the panels labeled 1911 there. And these panels range anywhere from, in this project, they were about 17,000 pounds up to 25,000 pounds, or even a little bit more than that. So it's a very heavy facade, and the structure has to be designed in a way that can accommodate it. But the real one of the real advantages, in addition to all the aesthetic things that we mentioned, are that the facade can be constructed rapidly. In the span of just like a few weeks, you can get the panels to be completely in place. And then from there, what happens is then the insulation and the interior stud work and everything follows behind that in a sort of very orderly sequence. And it's a really great sort of process to this type of facade. This is a shot from the rental side on the 11th floor, hoisting another panel into place. And we like this shot because it actually was something we didn't try to do with the facade. We didn't really start by looking at FIT and their sort of geometric pattern that they had. But later on, we sort of realized that, oh yeah, there's a relationship there that's almost kind of an inherent thing, ours being a very different approach. But it was an interesting connection that ended up happening.
That happens on projects a lot of the time, that there's kind of an unintended direction that evolves, whether it's subconsciously or just a total coincidence. We see it happen on many projects, and this is definitely one of them.
So then here's a shot from up on the 19th floor. So the 19th and 20th floor, we have these fly beams. So it's actually an exterior space that is protected by the precast facade, and this works out really well because at that height there's a lot of wind and the elements are a little bit more intense, and also just that feeling of being exposed at that height is nerve-wracking for a residential experience. So we wanted to provide a kind of a sense of safety and protection up there, but it creates some really interesting spaces in the project, these double height views, and also the views out to the city skyline. So then ultimately, these are shots of the facade completed, and all of those effects that Jordan was mentioning about the shadow and the articulation of the kind of inlay line work really comes together well. And we're just very excited about the overall quality of the precast facade and this contribution to the streetscape. Here's also a view of the rental building. In this case, we don't have the inlay, so it almost has this wave-like quality, which is really quite beautiful.
So the interiors, like many of our projects, we wanted there to be a very strong relationship to the envelope on what happens on the interior. So there's a coherence to the overall design vision. And so in this case, we focused on really health and well-being and thinking about this building as a respite from the crazy city life that we all live in New York City. And with that comes a really incredible amount of amenity space. I think we have over 30,000 square feet of amenity space available to both the condo and rental buildings. And the big portion of that is subterranean. We don't get into this like really amazing parking system that we have for all the residents in a minute, but beneath all of that is this incredible amenity floor. And initially we tried to really bring these kind of shoots of light down to activate the space, but that proved to be infeasible. And so we focused on really natural materials, stone and woods, which also gets repeated up in the units. But we also spent a lot of time thinking about the quality of lighting. So there's a lot of indirect light and materials selected for kind of their luminous qualities. So we wanted it to kind of be a bright, energized space, and it's really again focused on health and well-being with a big spa, a swimming pool, a gym, and then a community lounge area and multi-purpose room and kids' playrooms. It's got a little bit of everything. I think there's even a pet spa in there, which is not uncommon in buildings in the city these days. So on top of the building is a really incredible outdoor space. And so to the west, we overlook, as Wayne mentioned, Hudson Yards and then the Hudson River just beyond. And a beautiful, beautiful view of sunsets up there. So we thought about the west side of the building really being about dining, having like a dinner party up there, and then watching the sunset over the river. And then on the east side, dedicating that to kind of lounging during the day and getting kind of unobstructed access to the sun. The sun lounge rooms, kind of like a beachy type environment. And then the northeastern corner has a really incredible view of the Empire State Building, just a few blocks away. So that's kind of a lounge area with a big fire pit. So this is going to be a fantastic amenity for the people living in the building. And then the material selections and palette, we played a little bit on the contrast of the hue and materiality on the facades, and brought that into the master bedroom. And then the kind of strong geometry is also brought in the form of chevron patterns, or this custom carpet that we have that's actually the same geometry that you find on the panels, and that's through all the public corridors. And then a majority of the living spaces, the kitchen, living room, dining, is almost kind of a Scandinavian palette, white oak, and then white fantasy leather finish marble. So it's got really nice texture to it as well. So here's some shots inside the bathrooms with the contrasting materials, and the master bath, as I mentioned. And we love the powder room with this gray, undulating gray marble. So here are some shots of the sales gallery, which opened recently, of that kitchen. And some of the details in beautiful white oak.
All right, so one of the really interesting aspects of this project is actually the parking system. And this building doesn't require parking, but the owner was very interested in including it and trying to push the limits on how much parking could be provided here. So one of the things that we recognized immediately was parking would be very difficult in terms of being able to get a ramp into the site, and the site is split into two buildings. So we needed to have separate ramps in and out, and all of a sudden we were wasting a third of the floor plate with just getting circulation down into the parking system, and that space was way too valuable for retail and so forth. So what we did was we looked into an automated parking system. And so there's different types of automated parking. On the right-hand side, there's kind of a sort of older version of automated parking where you have a central space. The cars are brought into that space on these mechanized sort of conveyor belts. And then you simply the car gets moved into a spot. And then the belt goes back and picks up another car and so forth. So the problem with this is that while it's a lot more efficient than a traditional parking garage, you're still using all of that space, or losing all of that space in the center rather, to circulation. So what we looked into was what's called a puzzle system. It's been developed in Europe and in Israel, where you literally have cars on pallets, and they can move around almost as if they're literally like a puzzle. And you leave one space open, and that allows you to move all the other cars around and get your car in or out. And so it's quite incredible. It's completely controlled by computers. You arrive, you get out of the car, it goes into an elevator, it can go down and spin into the right orientation. And then once it hits the parking level, it's moving the cars around. It can also learn patterns of behavior. Like if you typically drop your car off at a certain time or pick it up at a certain time, the system will begin to learn that, and it will shuffle cars around to make it more efficient when you actually do call upon your car. There's also technology where from your apartment, you can call down and say, I'll be down to pick up the car in a few minutes, and then the car will begin to move in the system, and by the time you get down to the lobby, your car is coming up. So it's a really fascinating system. We'll show you some floor plans here, just what this looks like. This is the lowest level of the development. And what you can see here on the upper portion of the page and a couple spots on the lower portion are all of these different spaces, and they get labeled with different types of arrows indicating the directions that those pallets can move. And hopefully you can see my cursor here, but there's elevator on the right, an elevator on the left. And so the cars come down, they're in the correct orientation, and they simply move around. That's the lowest level. Then we have another level of parking as well. just above that, you can start to see the pool, the kind of underside of the pool start to emerge in the upper right there. So it's a very interesting system. It took a lot of coordination to kind of move things around to avoid columns. And actually during this process, the fire department and the Department of Buildings became much more aware of these systems and began to pay a lot of attention to how they could be improved to make sure that the conditions were safe for firefighters to come fight fires in this type of configuration. So originally you could build an empty shell and have a steel sort of cage that the cars could move around within, but the fire department also ultimately figured out that it would just be best to have separate floor slabs, but you can do a much tighter floor to floor, so maybe like 8 or 9 foot floor to floor, and you can have the cars within that moving around, and then there's access aisles that need to be provided. So in the end, it was a very long approval process, but we sort of worked with the city to figure out the best ways of how to configure these systems and make them safe. And then I just wanted to show you a couple construction photos. So this is early on, digging the foundation. That parking system, there's 2 levels of parking, and there's another layer of retail that's below grade. So we have a 45-foot deep foundation, which is very deep for the middle of Manhattan. And so we excavated the whole thing and see all this tremendous bracing that needs to go in place, and tiebacks in the neighboring buildings and so forth. But the foundation system is a secant wall, and what this is it's a series of piles that you can see on the left-hand image on the back wall there. So these are sort of concrete piers that have steel within them. They get driven into the earth, and then it's excavated out behind them. The piles they slightly overlap, so it creates a continuous wall the whole way around. And this type of system means that you don't have to underpin the neighboring foundations down to the depth that we were going, which would have been very cost prohibitive to do. So at any rate, the image on the left shows us completely excavated down to 45 feet. And then from there, like on the left, you start to infill the concrete superstructure, then you can remove all the bracing, and we came out of the ground. And ultimately, last January, we topped off the building on the right-hand image there. Very exciting moment there. And all these shots, we were very fortunate in this project that the sales office is located on adjacent property. So we're taking all these photos directly from the sales office. So when you come and look at an apartment, you can actually get the view that you're going to get, and you can literally see the construction site. So it couldn't be much more perfect than that. And so here's some views up on that 19th floor that we talked about earlier. You can actually get some spectacular views downtown Manhattan, and you can see the Statue of Liberty sometimes through the buildings. So it's going to be really great, and get all that sun from the south will be really wonderful in the apartments. And then a view out to the west, kind of the midpoint of Hudson Yards. This is even taller at this point, but really great sunset views, like Jordan was mentioning as well. And then we have a camera on top of the FIT building across the street, so we've been watching the construction go on. It's been really great to see the crane picking up the precast, putting it in place. Facade is now totally up, working on the bulkheads up on top of the building that house all the mechanical systems. And at this point, we're just a few months away from completion on the interiors as well. So just in closing, a couple more images of the facade. And yeah, I really just wanted to thank everybody here for the opportunity to share this project in Open House New York, and hopefully next year we can get you all out there and see it in person.
Absolutely. Thank you all for your interest, and thank you, Open House New York, for including us.